come up. I'm glad that you and my brother were able to connect today.
Yes, yes, and we are going to connect on Tuesday, and then we'll follow up on some more longer range strategic discussion to see about a number of the issues that I think he has on his mind, including Venezuela.
Well, that's right. He's very excited. I was so happy because he always has to go, but he stayed with us. I said, "Uh oh."
Yes, yes, yes. He called me
I
afterwards, and yeah.
I knew. I said, "Well, I said I knew Mr. Early was going to get him. I knew it. Yeah, I, I know my brother. Are you kidding me? I've known him every day of his life. He has known me every day of mine. So we're coming up now,
Right.
and 20 seconds. Hey, Bernadette, how you doing, sweetie? Happy New Year to you. I hope that you're doing well, and thank you so much for being with me today. And thank you for understanding me having to be off last week. Bronchitis. What can I tell you? We're up
And about
now.
how long are we go? About how long are we going?
If you don't mind, 50 minutes,
Okay.
if you can. Okay,
Go ahead.
let's come on up.
Okay.
And we are up right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Let's talk about Venezuela. Yeah, we're talking a lot about it today these days, because it's a very big story. We need to understand that we conducted a coup. We removed a president and his wife from their bedroom, and we are trying to install another government. And with the understanding we have said, our president has said, our corporations want the oil back. The deals that they cut before this revolution, well, we want the deals that we had during the colonial days. We want to get the oil for nothing, basically, and starve out the Venezuelan people. I don't know if the Venezuelan people will go back. As a matter of fact, I don't think they will. But I think we've got to look at this. There was no arrest warrant. The ICC court has not issued an indictment. The U.S. Congress has not declared war, and there's no arrest warrant. So the corporate media are calling it a capture, and you're seeing a lot of cheerleading. But it really is a kidnapping. Or what do you think? You let me know what you believe has happened here and what will be the fallout. You know, wars are very, very costly. And we're going in basically at the behest of oil companies because they want to make more money. Can you really afford that? And how will you benefit? Really? And there are other actors who wanted Maduro out. So let's talk about that. It's very interesting. And it's interesting to see the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Thomas Masseys, who Marjorie Taylor Greene is not the libertarian that Thomas Massey is, but it's interesting to see people from different places on the ideological spectrum who are saying this is a bad idea and I don't stand with this. Will we see more congresspersons resign from their seats because they just can't see a way out? There is a congresswoman who wrote, I don't even know why I'm here. I'm wasting my time. Because, see, remember, Congress is supposed to have the power of the purse, construct the laws. What they need the president to do, the executive branch is supposed to enact the laws. That's what they're supposed to do. We've got this all turned around. It's all upside down. And how will this impact our troops all across the world? You know, Maduro and Hugo Chavez and Gaddafi and persons like that are seen as freedom fighters. Do they have their issues? Don't we all? But they're seen as people who stood up for the people. And to see them deposed was very painful for people who are fighting for freedom all over the world. Watching this man do the perp walk, watching him march out of the presidential palace and into jail is designed not just to humiliate him, but it's designed to humiliate the Venezuelan people. How will they react to that? So, Heather, it's good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. So let's talk with James Early. Yes, had to bring him back. I couldn't stay away. I said, look, he has got to come to me and tell me today what it is that we're looking at. What it is and what are we looking at? Indeed, he is the former Smithsonian Institution Assistant Secretary for Education and Public Service. But this is someone, if you really want to understand the global South, if you want to understand the African diaspora, if you want to understand people of color, if you want to understand freedom fighters, and really the struggle to make things right in the world, where people in their own countries can benefit from the wealth that their countries are sitting upon. Well, if you really want to understand how the world has worked, you need to talk to James Early. And I'm so glad to have Mr. Early back. Happy New Year. It's wonderful to have you back once again.
Good. Happy New Year to you and to your listening audience. It's good to be with all of you.
Help me to understand, what is it that happened on Saturday in Venezuela, in Caracas?
Well, what we are seeing is the implementation of what Donald Trump and Marco Rubio are calling the Dunroe Doctrine, dating back to 1823, when President James Monroe implemented a policy that this hemisphere belonged to the U.S. in order to protect it against Europe. That was its initial instrumentation. What we're seeing is that Donald Trump is carrying out a regional on the continental America and a global policy of dictatorial intervention, dictatorial in the sense that he has collapsed the legislative body, which is supposed to set policy, and the president negotiates around how to implement that. He has collapsed basically the judicial policy, including compromising the Supreme Court. And as a kind of dictatorship of oligarchs, the oil companies, the techno oligarchs, and the like are all literally swilling at the White House in their new ballroom. And all of these interventions are designed around resources, negotiating resources for the Trump family and for these big time oligarchs. Venezuela has the largest oil reserve in the world. It is a part of a larger complex that runs all the way from Mexico, which nationalized its oil in the 1930s, up to a major find of oil in Trinidad Tobago, whose government is supporting Donald Trump, into Guyana, which also has a huge oil deposit, and then just south of there, huge oil deposits off the coast of Brazil. So this is Donald Trump explicitly saying, we are taking over the oil. We will run the country. We have already identified the people that we want to put in place. But this is a part of a larger construct. 2 weeks ago, it was a military intervention into Nigeria, ostensibly in a major Muslim northern area of Nigeria, ostensibly to protect Christians. But that's another resource base. It is a part of a larger global shift in which the French are being displaced from West Africa in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. Uh, and it is also a brutally open imperialistic land grab. Donald Trump has threatened to invade Mexico, which has a large oil deposit, which it also supplies Cuba with. He's again threatened to take over Greenland, another strategic mineral area. And of course, he has not given up on Canada as the 51st state in order to really make all of the Americas submitted to U.S. foreign policy. In the case of Venezuela, going after Maduro is just the beginning of the process of going after generally the Bolivarian Revolution, which started in the late 90s with the late Hugo Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution. What does the Bolivarian Revolution means? It means that Simon Bolivar in the 1800s led the successful decolonization processes against Spain, utilizing the resources, both men and boats of Haiti, which had already broken free from colonial rule. And that Chavez was the reemergence of this integrated Latin America Caribbean perspective. and put forth policies of subsidizing oil in the Caribbean, subsidizing healthcare in the Caribbean, building the Coalition of Latin American and Caribbean Countries, CELAC, and other regional bodies, noting that this is one of the richest natural resource and agricultural areas in the entire world. It is also the most unequal area of the world. And so that Venezuela is a major grab for oil. Now what is unfolding is now that they have sequestered, kidnapped Maduro and his wife Celia Flores, they are now left with the problem of the Chavez Maduro administrative offices are still in place, not only in the State House in Caracas, but across the country of governors and mayors, which means that there is a significant social base that voted for these people. And yes, there is moderate and right-wing opposition. There is also left-wing opposition to the Maduro government. The Communist Party of Venezuela, which was split by Maduro, taking part of that Communist Party into his Socialist Party, the PSUV. The other standing Communist Party has been very critical of its concern with worker rights, that they felt that Maduro was not upholding and that he was abandoning certain aspects of the Chavez collective process of a participatory democracy, as Chavez had proposed that. So this is the context of what we are now seeing as an hour-to-hour protracted war. Now attacking Delcy Rodriguez. I know Maduro personally. I know his wife personally. I know Delcy Rodriguez personally. But this is about policy. It's not about personal relations. Although the inhumane dimensions of dragging them out, they are a very close married couple. They are a Christian couple. They observe Christianity, despite the fact that they are socialists, or notwithstanding the fact that they are socialists. So now we are seeing an attack on Delcy Rodriguez, threatening her, also threatening the president of neighboring Colombia, and where there are 9 U.S. military base agreements, and where most of the cocaine is developed in the region. It passes through Venezuela, but not produced in Venezuela. We're seeing the co-optation of the Trinidadian prime minister, who has set up a military platform of radar and for the transition of U.S. military into Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, and the revival of bases in colonial Puerto Rico. So this is a major regional attack in the Americas on the part of Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, but also a global context. Finally, as a transition point, Cuba is the ultimate goal of Rubio, how to overthrow the Cuban Revolution, which is very closely aligned. Fidel Castro, the late Fidel Castro and the late Hugo Chavez were like father and son in their ideological humanistic views. They would joke with one another. Chavez would say, well, you produced a medical school that supplies medical personnel throughout the region and throughout the world. Fidel says, well, let's put together 10,000 more doctors. And Chavez would say, oh, no. It's got to be more like 20, 30,000 more. They thought big and humanitarian, and they provided these resources in exchange for money to support their education system, their health system, free education, free healthcare. So this is what Rubio and Trump are attempting to overturn, and to put all of that in the hands of the oligarchs. Bernie Sanders has been very, very keen in popularizing the term oligarchs, which is a synonym for the term capitalists. These greedy technological people who are making money hand over foot, not for growth and development of working class people, suppressing wages, not for universal health care, but for making more and more money for themselves. So we are facing a really dire situation hour to hour, as now they're putting forth another step in their propaganda war, their psychological warfare, saying that is the Vice President Delcy Rodriguez who gave up Maduro and his wife. I suspect totally untrue, but the intent of that is to rupture what is left of the solidarity within the chauvinistic government of Maduro, because now they have a problem: how to displace her, how to displace corrupt the military and other forces in order to put their people in place. There are hundreds of thousands of civil militias in addition to the military who have been armed, who are training on the weekend. So putting boots on the ground is going to be a problem. I suspect in the coming days we will hear more about the wounded and or killed. And we know that a helicopter was hit. Donald Trump has told us that. We know that some people were wounded. Donald Trump has told us that. We don't know if some people were killed. And now we're beginning to hear that a number of the security forces of Maduro were killed. I don't yet know the number. I called Venezuela yesterday morning twice to speak to two people on the ground, one former member of the government, one still at a very low ranking level of the government, to get some sense, but they did not yet have statistics. But one person told me that he lived in the area near the palace and that they had seen videos of charred bodies of dead and wounded, the collateral bombing of civilians as the U.S. helicopters went in. But over the days coming forth, I think we will get more and more details about that.
Is there what do you think is going to happen with President Maduro and his wife here? And I understand that his son was taken as well.
Well, one of the sons had been arrested before on what seemed to have been objective drug charges sometimes back, and a negotiation for his release, if memory serves me correctly, had occurred. I don't imagine that there is any drug connection between Maduro and his wife with narcotics or with their son. They may have supported their son as an individual, but I have no reason to believe that there is any evidence that they were involved in drugs. This is a part of the demonization, the propaganda process that goes on, in which both Republicans and Democratic Party representatives, particularly in South Florida, Schwartzman and Gonzalez, the right-wing Cuban, who is now on the board of the Regents of the Smithsonian Institution, have embraced to demonize and to try to justify taking Maduro in. I think we will see a humiliation going on, as you have mentioned, as they did with Noriega. They will parade them. We'll probably see serial television, if not direct cameras in the courtroom. Certainly for months on end, it will be a running story about the demonization of Maduro. Maduro was a former bus driver, comes from an humble background. He is a Christian, a practicing Christian, as is his wife. He is also a socialist. And so he comes from the popular mass community. And as you pointed out, this will not only be an attempt to dehumanize and to devilize him, it will also be to really depress the esteem of ordinary Venezuelans who have supported the popular policies of the Chavez revolution, and a number of whom have critiques, I think legitimate critiques, of the internal policies of the Maduro administration, but something for them to resolve, not for an external force to determine who will be head of government and what will be the policies, and to take over the oil there, which is the case that Donald Trump is explicitly putting out along with Rubio. And of course, Rubio is threatening Cuba openly.
Well, Mr. Early, my question about taking the president and his wife and his son did not have anything to do with drugs. I see them as they must be politically potent. They must have some traction with the people. And that is why it appears to me that they would be removed. I mean, I saw this playbook with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Anyone close to him, and particularly people who, for example, Reverend Jackson, who could stirreth up the people, if you will, you had to smear them.
Yes.
You had to demonize him in some way. Reverend Jackson, were you talking to Dr. King when he was killed? Why'd you go back to Chicago? Well, he was based in Chicago. He and James Bevel and C.T. Vivian, and they were called back to Chicago. But there's always they had to taint them to.
Yes, they had to go into the private life of Dr. King.
Yes.
And Dr. King was a public figure who never backed away from his ethical public responsibilities. Whatever the complexities of him as a private individual, it just made him human like the rest of us. But rather than attack him for his humanistic public policies, they wanted to smear him with all kinds of innuendos and FBI data and those kinds of things. In the case of Maduro, he is from the common people, as is his wife. He is a
Mhm.
Christian. It is a significantly Catholic country, but with a number of
Mhm.
Protestants in Venezuela. But from a political point of view, he is the inheritor of being a major interlocutor with building a regional Caribbean force with the CARICOM countries and supporting discounted oil for them and setting up industries, refineries within places like Dominica, with supporting healthcare, a major supporter of the independence of Haiti, on the ground support with the Cubans in medical care and the like. But he was a key interlocutor in sustaining a resource relationship with Cuba. That is the the pressing political linkage, is to try to cut that off. Now, what they have inherited is that the vice president has been in charge in the last number of years of dealing with oil and petroleum and the like. So they're sort of right back where they started, and they will continue to try to undermine. So this is the dehumanization will be to say to ordinary Venezuelans that do not raise your head up because we will cut it off. And then from a political vantage point, do not try to extend any humanistic policies within the region that don't comport with what the US government wants, particularly around Cuba. Rubio has been rabid in calling Cuban medical personnel slaves, of leveraging countries, forcing them not to use Cuban doctors. And of course, the internal questions of places like Brazil and Mexico and these larger countries, including Italy and some other and across the continent of Africa, is why is not their production of doctors sufficient? Doctors tend to be in a more bourgeois structure. They get their medical license. They want to be concentrated in the major cities, as was the case of South Africa. The South African Medical Association pushed back on Cuban doctors because they wanted to only go to Cape Town and Johannesburg and Pretoria, not to the interior and these small hamlets and villages where Cuban doctors are trained in social preventive medicine and to go in to live with the people in these areas. I've been in the most marginalized communities in Caracas, where Cuban doctors are living in these squalid, marginalized communities in small spaces, right there with the people, serving the people. Or I've been in hotel rooms where I get a fever, and the next thing I know, someone is knocking on my door. It is a doctor who's living in the hotel. As is the
Mhm.
case with Cuba, you also see that in Venezuela. So these are the larger political socialized policies that the US government wants to, as they're doing here in the US, privatize everything, turn it into a commodity, stand against universal health care, uphold these insurance companies, and the like. So this is a larger political context beyond trying to knock down Maduro and his wife simply as coming from the common folk. As I say, he was a bus driver when Chavez selected him to be a part of his government.
Well, why is that important in his politics? That he
Well,
is a bus driver, someone who saw people every day, someone who people saw every day.
because he comes from a real community that people can identify with as a social
Mhm.
politician, not as a vertical politician. Chavez was
Mhm.
I spent a fair amount of quality time, Danny Glover and myself, often just the two of us with a translator with Chavez, although I'm a Spanish speaker, I always spoke with him and exchanged with him in Spanish. He was a very gregarious, popular figure, always out in the streets, always out in the interior, who studied agrarian reform and water leverages, and who could talk to people about common everyday things, who was a great singer, who knew all of the popular songs, all the classical songs. These are unusual kinds of political personalities that really do represent the common woman and common man. And of course, in our structure, there's a tendency to try to verticalize the political individual, to make or her or him as a kind of singular personality force, not really looking closely at what is their responsibility for governance policy, define them by their governance policy. So, many people in the Black community will say, well, Bernie Sanders is just an old Jew. Yes, he is an old Jew, but what are his policies? What are his domestic and international policies? Our AOC is just some young Latina. Yes, she is a young adult Latina, but what are her policies? Or your brother, well, that's just Jesse Jackson's son. Yes, he is Jesse Jackson's son, but what are his ethical and life-defining policies for the nation and our intersection with the world? This is where we have to turn away from personality politics, although personalities can be very important, as Jesse Jackson was not the only person who shared the kinds of policies and ethics that he had, but he is an extraordinary personality. Martin Luther King was not the best preacher in the Black community, but he had an articulation that was so distinctive that people tend to want to focus him on as an individual. But of course, he was called by a community that was already organized. He didn't just get up and say, let me go out and organize this aspect of the modern civil rights movement. So the context of Maduro, the context of Chavez, the context of Lula in Brazil. Lula is a white-skinned, short man who came from abject poverty. He knows the misery of the majority Black population in Brazil because as a white man, he lived that misery and he knows it. So he was able to go to Davos and say to the white men of the powerful white men of the world, you white men, this little white-skinned guy saying, calling them white men, in effect saying, I know from a point of view of humanity, not just from a point of view of my skin color, what racialized misery and poverty is about. And this is the context out of which the bus driver, the trade union Maduro comes out of, coming out of a Christian background and a kind of socialized politics rather than a vertical politics. This is what Rubio wants to undermine. And of course, Fidel Castro, this is the centennial anniversary of the birth of Fidel Castro, and August 13th, 26 will mark the 100th birthday. Fidel Castro, I would say, was first and foremost a humanitarian. It was about ethics, what's right and what's wrong. No money. They didn't. As he pointed out, we went into Angola and we fought to help defeat the apartheid government. We didn't bring back one diamond. We didn't bring back 1 ounce of uranium. We were there for humanity, not for some kind of negotiated reciprocal arrangement. As Donald Trump with the oligarchs of the world, all of the policies in the international arena is about natural resource grabs. So when he says he's doing these peace plans, it's about natural resources. And of course, they have now become very explicit that what is going on in Venezuela is about oil. And how Democratic Party leaders have once again allowed themselves to be duped when they were briefed a few weeks ago by Marco Rubio and Hesed from the military that no, we will not invade Venezuela. And then they turn right around, and now we see these people saying, they deceived us. Well, they've deceived us on every domestic policy case and every international policy case. So the listening audience, ultimately, it is we, the people, we, the citizens, the demos, the ordinary people, the power of ordinary people who elect these public servants that we have to maintain contact with, not just observe, hold accountable, and also respect the complex tasks that they have and put our voices forward such that we are backing them and they are not threatened by APAC and the others who are buying politicians back and forth. So there's the power of the listening audience as citizens that's got to step forward to support your brothers, support ALC, support Mandami, hold them accountable on a day-to-day. And these are people who want to be held accountable. They are not interested in just being dislocated individual politicians simply to be observed. They are public servants. They understand that term, that they are servants of the people. They also understand that their responsibility is more complex than any citizen because they have to have a panoramic view of what all citizens want in their own districts, in their own states, in the nation, and in the world. And they have to build a staff of expertise to be able to manage that and to say to the public, the policies that are being put forward are in the common well-being. Not everybody can have everything, but what is most important that most people can share from rather than a small group of people. And this is the context of the Bolivarian Revolution, in which the flawed human personality of a Maduro, the errors and mistakes of Maduro, the compromises that others may not agree with, but he is the servant of the people there that should make that determination of whether he stays in power, of why, and to what end.
Well, is there a racial dimension to any of this?
Most
I
definitely.
mean,
Most
within
definitely.
Venezuela and just, well, and do you think it's
So,
important to even amplify that?
oh,
If
it is it
please.
is it is very important to amplify that. We must remember that the development of these colonial republics across this hemisphere, and particularly in South America, was basically an economic movement using the minds and the bodies of enslaved Africans. About 10 million went into Brazil. There are now new census records that suggesting that the majority population in Venezuela is of mixed race. In Brazil, 53% of the population self-identifies in the census as negro, meaning black, and raça mixta, meaning mixed race. So is the case of Colombia. So is the case of Venezuela, where the U.S. Forces, naval forces, are aligned between Trinidad, which is 25 or 30 miles less off the coast of Venezuela, is called Barlovento. Barlovento is the concentrated majority of enslaved African descendants who come from the Kikongo and the Congo republics in Southern Africa. They know their culture, they know their rituals, their songs, their religious practices, their agricultural practices. They are literally on the front line of a coastal foot invasion. Hugo Chavez, we must remember that when he came to power in the late 90s, he was called Mono by the opposition. Mono means monkey because of his coloring,
Hmm.
his big lips, his curly hair, the way that he spoke Spanish. And when Danny Glover, along with Bill Fletcher, who was then president of the Trans-Africa Forum, Danny Glover, president of the board, invited me to go along with their board members in 2003 to meet President Chavez. When we, after 2 days, we met with him at the palace to have dinner. He said, "Let's sit down and talk." He gave a long hour and a half, almost 2 hour lecture on Haiti with not one piece of paper, calling names. And I realized when he said we have a debt to Haiti, he understood that Bolivar had to go to Haiti to ask Dessalines for men and boats. And when he went back into Venezuela to start his revolution and was defeated, and he had to flee, where did he go? He went to Jamaica, the famous Bolivarian letter from Jamaica, these black republics. Chavez understood that, and he understood that he was connected to that. And he said to Danny Glover, "You know, I am a mestizo of Indian and Spanish background, but my grandmother was una negra. She was a black woman. I too am an Afro descendant, even as I am a mestizo." And some months later, I've said this on your program before, on National Public Radio, or Democracy Now, I think it was, at the United Nations, Chavez was heard to say, "You see these big lips and you see this curly hair? That's Mother Africa." And he opened up new embassies in Africa and sent these young black ambassadors there. I was just in Lome, Togo for the Ninth Pan-African Congress a few weeks ago, and I met with Jesus Chucho Garcia, the conceptualizer of Afro epistemology, with whom I worked for 30 years, who is the ambassador. He was Chavez's ambassador in Angola. He is now the Maduro administration ambassador in Benin, Mali, Niger, and Senegal, an Afro descendant who is very clearly and articulate about his African heritage. So any invasion in a place like Venezuela, the most marginalized communities will have the most negative impact. That will be indigenous communities, of which there are many in Venezuela, but it will also be significantly Afro descendants who Chavez really began to empower, built cacao cooperatives in Barlovento, where chocolate is produced. And of course, it is estimated that something around 30% of U.S. military is black. And so it would be interesting to
Mhm.
find out what are the demographics of the soldiers who are sitting there in the Caribbean Sea, and we're Black and white and Latino working class soldiers, because that's who will be the foot soldiers who will be attacking a country Black and brown. And it brings back Muhammad Ali. No Vietnamese ever called me nigger. We have to ask ourselves, why are we sending people into the military to go and kill other Black and brown and indigenous and poor white people for these oligarchs? Because, as has been pointed out, there are no ordinary citizens who have oil wells who will benefit from the extraction of oil. We're paying high prices. Affordability is very much about the winter and being able or not to avoid heating, to afford heating or to pay rent. None of this will redound to ordinary working people, nor to the middle class in the United States. And so these are the racialized, and of course the gender factors as well. Because in those most oppressed communities, including white communities, it will be single women and children, particularly in rural and marginalized rural areas, who will feel the death of pain and misery from these kinds of invasions. None of that is being talked about. And when I look at MSNBC, I was looking at Jonathan Capehart, and I forget the other young man's name, the other Black American who's, I think, head of the National Press Club or something. They bought into these lies of demonizing Maduro. They use the term we. We have invaded. No, we have not invaded. A right-wing fascist government, which is now popularly being called on MS and NBC and CNN racist and misogynist and homophobic and fascist. Those are not left marginalized extremist terms. These are now popular middle class and working class terms. Uh, it is not we, it is they. And we have to deal with that as citizens, particularly progressive citizens. We're seeing progressive citizens abandon certain dimensions of the Democratic Party leadership to elect social democracy candidates and democratic socialists for their policies, not for the nomenclature of their ideology. These are the questions that we have to ask ourselves and demand of our politicians, that these are our common interests. So the Black community, the Black diaspora, the African diaspora has a large stake, as will be the case of any attack on Cuba, as is the case with the economic warfare going on in Cuba. If people were to go into Santiago, Cuba today and see the misery that is going on, Cuba is in serious, serious economic trouble. Trash piled up all over Havana because they can't get oil to run the trash trucks. So that then you have all of these airborne diseases that are now spreading. These are highly racialized issues, such that even Socialist Cuba has had to come around and establish a presidential commission against racism and discrimination. Their terms, not mine, recognizing that not only did they inherit a historical legacy of racism, but it gets reproduced with Eurocentric dominance and by remittances coming from abroad, and where few darker skinned people have had an opportunity to leave and to join families, upper and middle class families, or be supported by the CIA, as many of the first Cuban immigrants in South Florida were, to send money back. So it has a racialized impact. And finally, they have had to come around to recognize that class has a sociology. First and foremost, it has a gender. And then, because of the history of racialized economic capital development in this hemisphere, it also has a color. Including brown-skinned people. And so the first attack of the Trump administration, second administration, were largely significantly against immigrants, mostly brown people, but there are many Senegalese and North Africans and from other places in Africa who are migrating into Latin America. So the pressure of outward migration is not just on the U.S., it's across Latin America, and it's coming from the other parts of the South, the African South, fleeing economic constraints, civil wars, supported by neo-colonial governments with ex-colonies of France and Britain and the like. So yes, it has a highly racialized implication, as well as a broader class and gender implication.
Well, I'd like for you, because I've got brother Luis Alexander Paiva Segara, who is from Venezuela, and I've had any number of Venezuelan of brothers and sisters from Venezuela who have tuned into the show down through the years, and I'm always honored uh, to have you here. You're part of the family, and maybe it's my first name that attracts some people. I've been told it's any number of factors,
Okay.
right? And but then they look me up and find out that I'm related to Reverend Jackson, and there's that. That's that too. So I have a lot of his Latino and Hispanic listeners. So there's that. But he said, "Stand up for the people. Why are you talking on behalf of my people?" On behalf of Venezuelans. We have been invaded by Russia, Cuba, China, and Iran for 30 years. And under the most brutal oppression any people could take, one third, 10 million Venezuelans have escaped the country. What the blank are you talking about? And because I wanted to, because it's a whole line, and I think I wanted to let him have his say. Are you aware of the brutal political apartheid taking place in Venezuela by Chavez and Maduro since 1998? So I'm very clear on where he's coming from politically. Oil. Are you aware that in Venezuela you have to be in a list of you be in a list of the unique party to get gas to cook your food? He continues, give me a break. You have no right to speak on behalf of my country and my people. And you continue. Let me see. The Chavez and Maduro revolution is a hub of mafia, international crime, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He continues to go on. I can say this, and I'd like for you to respond to that. Um, Wherever there are human beings, I think that we all have an obligation to speak to whatever crisis we're facing. And I can tell you, more black people, if I'm going to look at black people, look at through that lens, were sent to South and Central America and
Yes.
were brought to the United States of America. And I take that part of the world, Mr. Early, very personally because my grandmother and my maternal family are from that part of the world. My mother's father went back to the Caribbean, came to the United States for a little short while, but he found the racism here to be so abhorrent, he left and never came back. My grandmother, my mother's mother a was a migrant worker, and so because she was born into poverty, and so she knew Havana before I went there, before the rest of my family went there. She said, "Well, when you go to Havana, when you go get on this street, walk down this street, walk down 2 blocks, turn to the left, but make this right. That'll be the quick way into Hotel Havana." Blah blah blah. She knew it that well from her youth. And so, to be frank with you, and then my father also was honored to receive from President Chavez and Vice President Maduro and the people of Venezuela your highest civilian honor, um, in acknowledgement of the work that he has done as a freedom fighter throughout his lifetime. Indeed, he went Lula in Brazil had him come in to campaign for him in his first presidential campaign, which he won because he was trying to rally the black vote.
Right.
Those of us who are conscious are trying to bring all of us together. We're not trying to be divisive. So I think we have the right, I think we have the obligation, Mr. Early, to speak to what we have seen, because I think that given what we have experienced in this Western experience that we've had, watching someone kidnapped, watching the West say that it is our oil underneath the feet of these brown and black people, it's profoundly insulting and assaulting. And what happened this past weekend, yesterday, to the president, his wife, and his son, did not just happen to them, it happened to Venezuelan people, and it happened to all people who seek freedom and who won't rest until they receive it. So, yeah, I'm feeling some kind of way about this, Mr. Early, um, because I'm from a freedom fighting family, and you're a
Right.
freedom fighter.
Right.
And I don't like to see anyone treated this way. I don't want
Well,
to
let
see
me
the Western corporations to go in there and rape these people.
Right.
That's what the
Right.
revolution stopped.
Right. Well, let me speak to
That's just
Mr. Segarra's point, because I think he shares the same point of view of Marco Rubio, and it's his
hmm
right to share that point of view. I don't know whether he's speaking from Venezuela or he's outside of Venezuela. I don't know if he is a political refugee or an economic refugee who was forced out. About 7 million or more Venezuelans have left Venezuela for economic and political reasons. Some of that
hmm
is the fault and failure of the Maduro administration, but significantly, it is the economic warfare against Venezuela that's what it set up to do. When the Cuban Revolution came, Eisenhower and right up through Kennedy's and right up to the Clintons, they said the objective here is to squeeze the people until they overturn the people that they have voted for. Now, Mr. Segarra has every right to take that position, but his notion that it
Sure.
is my country and nobody else has a right to speak about it. Does he speak about racism? Does he speak about the indigenous community? Does he speak about the American imperial policies? No. And he shares the view of a number of Venezuelans. There's a moderate opposition that I think have some legitimate criticisms to make. He may be a part of the moderate, or he may be a part of the further right wing Machado opposition. His right, who says we will become a client state, a neo colonial vassal leadership, and turn it all over to Donald Trump. Uh, but if he can speak in support of U.S. policies, this is a global community. We are both national citizens and we're global citizens. We're integrated through mass communication. We're integrated through migrations. We're integrated through extended families and diasporas, and certainly through economics. So, any narrow nationalist perspective that no one has a right to speak about, I don't speak for Venezuela. I'm speaking about Venezuela. I'm also speaking about my close historical ties to Afro descendants in Venezuela, one of whom was Hugo Chavez, an Afro descendant. Look at the
hmm
coloring and the features of Maduro. He is not right out of Europe or the Middle East. So everyone
hmm
has a right and a responsibility to take not only a national perspective, but a global perspective. So Mr. Sagata, I hear you. I don't agree with you, but it is not just narrowly your country, particularly when you've got a fascist, racist, homophobe. I'm talking about mainstream language now, and even Republicans, some Republicans, a number of Republicans, increasing Republicans, are imposing this kidnapping of Maduro and Celia Flores, his wife, who are opposing this military intervention and getting in a conflagration. But if that is where you stand, then we stand in opposition to one another in our ethics and in our defining politics. But I am glad that you have the freedom to express your opinion. And certainly here is my response of disagreement with that opinion. But I do not accept that only you can speak about Venezuela. I don't speak for Venezuelans, and neither do you. You speak for a segment of Venezuela. And it is important that we hear and that we have programs like this, which are open to informed debate, such that you can come on and put forth the views that you have. So I thank you for taking the opportunity to put forth those views.
Indeed, that's why I wanted to amplify them because they fly in the face of what the majority of the audience that I'm seeing are feeling and believing. But I want you to know, Mr. Sagara, that you have a home here. As long as you're respectful, you can don't
Yes.
use foul language. You can be here. You should be here, and you should express how you're feeling. I think this is a very, very interesting time. I also am clear that we have bots. So I get that too, because there are people who absolutely there is we don't control this social media space. The oligarchs do, and they certainly do not want people who would support those who support the view of the 99%. These are the
Yes.
people who are most profoundly affected, Mr. Early, by these policies. Please speak to them in these last 2 or 3 minutes that we have here. What would you have us, as we're looking at this? I mean, we're going to see something that to me is it's very painful to see the president of this country from these humble people who have been fighting to use the wealth that God has given them to improve their lives and the lives of everyone that they see in need. Um, I go back to the Newsweek cover story on Dr. King's assassination. Of course, I was 4 when that happened, but I do remember it because I remember meeting Dr. King, Mr. Early. In fact, he was Congressman Jackson's godfather.
Wow.
And my father didn't have, he said, my parents didn't have any money, but my parents said, well, what we will do is give you experiences. Those will be enriching. We can introduce you to people and help you to understand the world that we're trying to change. And I saw something very interesting, Mr. Early. And I kept going back trying to find all of the covers of the magazines, the major magazines, to see how they covered Dr. King. The Newsweek cover photo was not a picture of Dr. King speaking before uh, the hundreds of thousands at the March on Washington. Didn't have a photograph of him marching or just speaking to people or being amongst the people. Do you know what it was a picture of? Dr. King was in the casket in the background and it was blurred. But in the foreground, in sharp relief, was a black woman, an older black woman wearing a wool coat, an umber wool coat, and a scarf, and she was screaming in grief and agony.
Mm.
And I said, what they're trying to do is tell us that. They're trying to tell us that the movement is dead. We have to watch these signs. We have to watch what we have to understand what we're seeing.
Yes.
And my heart is broken. It's broken. It can heal. But when I think of these people, whatever their issues are with their president, and I don't care how much you like someone, you will have issues with them because you're going to disagree with
Yes.
someone.
Yes.
You just with that you held.
Yes. Yes.
I know it was spiritually, it was a spiritual assault to have this big white country come in and take that brown man out of there.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So help me to. You can't unscramble the egg, but you certainly can put it in a pan and make something make
Something
something out
different
of
out
it.
of it.
Help, you know, help me to
Well,
understand what are we looking at?
well, I have personally been calling on my Facebook page and with activists that I know that what needs to happen immediately is to put together an international high-powered legal team with Venezuelan legal experts, including experts from here in the US, to defend them against what I suspect are false allegations, totally false allegations about drug trafficking. Uh, and so that is one thing that I think should happen. I think also we should demand, as many countries are demanding, that they be released and returned to Venezuela. That is not a likelihood, but a trial will come. So practically, there could be a high-powered legal team. And for the Venezuelans inside Venezuela, in a peaceful way, to resolve the contradictions among them, including unelecting this president if they are able to do that. Now, there are two contexts to this. We must remember that the late Jimmy Carter said that Venezuela had the most sophisticated and verifiable election system in the world because they put money into it. And yes, I think Maduro is to be criticized, totally criticized for not releasing whatever the results were. But most countries of the world say, okay, he is the president. And he offered to negotiate with the Trump Rubio invasion forces on oil, and they may have negotiated him out of power. But that's something that the Venezuelans have to resolve. I am also critical of situations, and Maduro is one example of this, where individuals feel they must be in power for extended periods of time. We recognize that when Raul Castro became appointed by the National
Mm.
Assembly and elected as president of Cuba after his brother Fidel Castro, one of the first things that he did was to propose a law that you can have no more than 2 5-year terms as a senior executive. That is such that the principles and the ethics and the policies of government get socialized, not individualized and personalized. And so it is questionable that only a singular leader, she or he, should have to remain in power to carry. So I am critical of that. But let the Venezuelans resolve it. But in an immediate sense, I think this legal team should be put forth. And I think the U.S. is going to have a hard case approving a narco traffic relationship between Maduro. And we don't know what the charges of against his wife. They simply went in, they could have left her. There is no indictment
Hmm.
against her. But this is the cruelty, the inhumanity, the might makes right posture of this administration and its control of the House and of the Senate and much of the judiciary. So these are the immediate things that I think should happen, and we should rail against the demonization and this clown show that we're going to see of dehumanizing him as a way of saying to others, you are under our thumb, even if you are allied with our policies. We, as Donald Trump says, we are in charge. We will, and you, and he said, you know, the people that we are bringing in to run the government and also to run our
Hmm.
oil. He's claiming that it's our oil. So I would say to the Mr. Segaras of the world, because I am really uh, focused on the kind of analysis that he's making. Stand up for your national sovereignty, your independence and self-determination, and resolve your own problems and issues within Venezuela. And don't invite fascist, racist oligarchs in to determine for you what you will be and why and who you will be. That is what Machado has done, and that is what the other part of the opposition, who does not agree with Machado, has says this is a national question. These are national issues that we should be able to resolve. And they're not saying that they should be able to resolve them independent of external alliances, right, left, or center. But they're saying essentially they must be resolved by Venezuelans themselves, not by an imperial force. And that's why we're seeing many Republicans stand up and saying, we do not want to get into another conflagration. This is a violation of all of the principles of international law, and we should stand with them. So there are many people on this side of line who are objecting to this imperial kidnapping and attempt to colonize Venezuela by the Trump Rubio, really a kind of gang, the gangsters, but they
Hmm.
don't stand, while they're on the same side of the line, they don't stand in the same place. So we're seeing a broad popular front of outrage and disgust and rejection of these policies. And I ask everyone to join that. It does not mean that we are all in the same. We should continue our debates and trying to resolve our differences and arguing them out, but in a peaceful manner, based on the ethics and the accumulated protocols now for centuries that through the United Nations and other regional bodies, remembering that Latin America, led by Chavez and Fidel Castro and the Caribbean countries, CARICOM, declared Latin America and the Caribbean countries a zone of peace. They have many,
Hmm.
many differences, ideological and political, but they declared themselves a zone of peace to find debate for mutual cooperation and interest and to find peaceful and sensible, non warring ways to continue the debate about their differences. That's the context that we should stand for. It's not about having everybody think like me, having everybody think like them. It's about how we go about handling these differences. That's the test of our humanity. That's the test of advancing democracy beyond the annual rituals of voting people in and out and overturning accumulated liberties and justice simply based on a majority. That is what I would leave the listening audience with. We the people, demos, the ordinary people, Kwasha, the power of ordinary people. That's what democracy is about, qualified by progressive, retrograde, moderate, conservative, and right wing perspectives about that. I ask people to join the progressive and the radical, meaning going to the root to advance and protect the accumulated values that have included more human beings into the process of the deliberations of how we should govern ourselves around what ethics and how we should support one another in mutual development, even as we differ with one another ideologically, politically, sometimes religiously, but peacefully.
James Early, it is always a joy and an honor to share the time and space with you. I hope you think you've helped us to understand just where we are and how we need to look at all of this, everyone. May God bless you real good. See you on the next Santita Jackson show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.